Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to our webinar session today. It is Scoping Your IT Services to Maximize Value. It is the second webinar in our ITSM Transformation Series. My name is Alexander Mazurek with Quint, Wellington, Redwood, and I'll be your host during today's session. Now about our organization, Quint, Wellington, Redwood. We're a 100% independent management consulting firm that was established originally over in Amsterdam in 1992. But today we've expanded to be a completely global company with over 250 consultants operating in 49 countries on just about every single continent. Our core businesses include sourcing, architecture, governance, lean IT, service management, of course, and DevOps. We're very proud to say that we've been listed as the top global advisor on sourcing and governance by the IAOP for the last 3 years in a row. They've rated us the highest possible ratings in the areas of client satisfaction, delivery of excellence, and innovative programs. And last off, we like to pride ourselves on being a trendsetter in the areas of ITSM, lean IT, and DevOps. Now, as I mentioned, this is the second webinar in our ITSM Transformation series. Last week was Planning an Effective ITSM Transformation, and the follow-up to today's webinar next week at the exact same time, next Wednesday at the same times, is going to be Managing Your ITSM Project to Success, and our colleague Kevin Dutton will be presenting that one to you, and you can look forward to that one as well. Now, just a quick recap of what happened in last week's session in case you're a little fuzzy or you don't remember. These are the three key areas that we covered in that webinar. Preparing for the organizational change during your transformation, choosing how to monitor and track your project, and last off, making sure that you do a thorough assessment to define the scope of your transformation program, and which will be covered in even further depth in today's session. And now, without any further delay, I'm going to hand things over to our presenter today, Joel Pomalis. Thank you for joining us, Joel.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Joel Pomalis, and I'm a senior consultant and ITIL expert with Quint, Wellington, Redwood. I've been with the firm for about a year now, and I've been doing this for about 10, 12 years. And I have a experience in helping organizations realize improvements in IT service management. And this theme for today is very near and dear to my heart. I've been thinking about it for a couple of months now, and I'm really, really glad to have an opportunity to share this with you and to have this conversation and discussion with most of you. So let's get started. So what is this all about? I've had this idea a couple of times while out and about with my family and friends having dinner, something very mundane, something that we do every day. Many times I've stopped to truly observe and analyze what a restaurant does and how can I relate that in ITSM terms. I've tried to understand all the moving parts and how they deliver value to me as a customer. There are many examples here, and I wanted to apologize for many of you that haven't had lunch. This is probably a good incentive after the webinar to go have lunch. But my favorite example has to be the hamburger example. This is the example I chose for when I started thinking about this. There is a food chain here in the United States which is very popular, which particularly came to my attention. It's not the one with the arches or the king or the kid. Many of you, by process of elimination, will probably guess which one it is. I'm not going to give it free advertising here now. But its singular focus and scope on their offerings has always been fascinating to me. So every time I go there, probably 90% of the time I go to this restaurant, I go for only one thing, and that is burgers. The simplicity of their menu and their offerings always caught my attention. So I always go there and they have just a very single defined scope of burgers. They do sell other stuff. They have fries, of course. They have shakes now, and they sell vegetable sandwiches and hot dogs. But their core business is hamburgers. And you can get anything that you want related to that scope. So how does this relate to ITSM, I was wondering to myself. And I've come to understand how defining scope for a service can be used to deliver value for an organization. In IT, this idea comes from ISO 20000. at least in my experience. A couple of years ago, I had the privilege of working for a project which had an ISO IEC 20000 certification. For those of you who do not know or are not aware, ISO 20000 is the international standard for ITSM. The too long didn't read version of this is that it is a standard established by an official organization that certifies service providers against the requirements of the standard. And it is mostly focused for service providers. I really don't want to go too deep into ISO here in this chat. If you want to, we can have a chat offline. My contact information is going to be at the end of the webinar. But many things that I learned during the project I mentioned was that defining a good narrow scope of services in alignment with business requirements is one of the best ways to manage what the standard calls a service management system, which is everything you see outlined in the diagram to the left. I am quoting the exact clause from the standard to the right to give you an idea as to what this means. Let's be clear. If you have no desire or business or clear business incentive to pursue ISO IEC 20000 certification, you already have to. Remember, this is a lengthy process and it takes time. It takes more than a year. It probably takes 18 months, 24 months. It takes multiple audits and a whole lot of work with your organization. If you have a good incentive, you could pursue it. If you're a service provider, you should definitely pursue it and become a competitive edge. But even if you don't pursue the standard, there are many good things about the standard that can help an IT organization. And one of the things that it happens is, how do you define the scope of service? Here you can see a couple of example scope statements you can see publicly at the URL that's listed here below the maps in the slide. You can actually go see how organizations have defined service scope for them, which is applicable for the certification. If you go to many of the statements, you'll see that they are very specific as to what they are providing. For example, IT services has defined the service catalog. To whom are they providing it to, and even down to the location and the organization inside the company itself. So for example, the third bullet down says the IT service management system of company that supports provision of IT services in accordance with the service catalog to internal customers from location. It is very, very specific. And you can imagine how when you define that scope of services as applicable to the standard, everything that falls under the scope of the certification has to be in accordance with the requirements. Everything within the defined SMS. Here's an interesting fact. According to the APNG Group Registry, there are a grand total of 841 service providers globally that have gone through the rigor of ISO certification. Of those, 7%, just 65, are in the United States. These are providers that have decided that their service management practices have to be at such a good level that it warrants going through a third-party audit every couple of years. It's probably normally between 3 to 5 years, depending. So I've shown you all this. What does this mean, and why should you care? Well, it is all about supporting outcomes. Here I bring another example that is very dear and near to me. The Apollo program. The journey to get a man to the moon was a sensational feat of human work and effort. What made this unique? The desire and drive of a nation to, quote, before the decade is out, get a man to the moon and land him back safely to Earth. That was a desired outcome, a singular drive to do something no one had done before and to beat the competition, in this case the Soviets, to the moon. You know what happened. Over the course of a decade, thousands of people worked together with a single vision, working through the years in an iterative fashion to achieve that purpose. At every step, contributing with value to the brave men that chose to go to the moon by incorporating lessons learned, often very painful ones. And two, in the summer of 1969, finally land Apollo 11 on the surface of the moon. So everything that they did was within the scope of supporting outcomes. They didn't do anything else but support landing a man on the moon and bringing him back. They could have decided to do anything else or any other activities NASA could have, but they didn't. They supported outcomes. You might think that there are no similarities between the Apollo program and your organization, and I will challenge you to see beyond. You, like the thousands of people that supported the space program, have outcomes to support. Your company has visions of success that it wants to achieve. accurately interpreting and translating vision to outcomes and how these outcomes are supported by your organization by delivering value at every step will certainly make IT and the people and technology supporting the business an integral part of the organization that can become your competitive edge. For this, you need a good defined service scope. So let's examine a couple of ideas on how scoping your services is something you should consider if you want to be better at delivering value. Very often, IT organizations take little to no time to truly understand what the business truly wants and appreciates of them. Quite often, this is the result of not performing a voice of the customer analysis. Doing this produces key pieces of information that may help frame the discussion around scope definition. Having and understanding the voice of the customer is helpful to determine what vital business functions of the organizations are. A VBF, a vital business function, is a part of a business process that is critical for the achievement of the desired results of the organization. Note carefully that I said the business and not IT. IT supports the business process by providing activities and functions that support the goals of the business. In the previous example, we use astronauts. The vital business function of the business, in that case NASA, is to get them to the moon and back. Here, in this example, we use a bank and an ATM service, which is not as intense and important as taking a man to the moon, but it's relevant still. In this regard, the vital business function of a bank is to make sure that their customers have access to their funds whenever they want. Everything else that does not fall under this BBF can be classified differently. If you look at it from another angle, what activities do your business deliver that if it were to stop or be badly delivered, will your customers go elsewhere? Once the voice of the customer is understood, we can analyze the value stream of all of the processes and moving parts that contribute to the delivery of the service. All of the processes and functions are interlinked and are heavily dependent from one another. Understanding how they work and understanding where there are wasteful choke points is key in further refining what the scope of your service may look like. Having a well-defined scope also influences the way an IT organization designs its approach to delivering processes and other ITSM elements. Let's go through these for a bit. First, let's talk about processes. With a well-defined scope of services, you can take a look at the way your processes are designed and begin tailoring them in combination with lean IT techniques to what the service requires. Let's go back to the bank ATM example. If we know that presenting the wrong PIN 3 times for an ATM transaction will capture the card and require the customer to visit the branch, what we can do during service design activities, we can identify that as a service request because the ATM service is working as assigned. You want people to feel safe that if the card falls under the hands of someone that it should not fall to, that it locks the account up. You can, during service design, call that a service request, test, transition all the response requirements and procedures, and present operations with everything they need to respond to that business request of resetting a PIN early in the life cycle of the service. If it's not in the scope of the ATM banking service and it does not affect it, why would operations care to fix it or track it? It's probably simply noise. It just takes the attention away from delivering a stable service. Another example to consider here is the CMDB, the Configuration Management Database. No doubt that you've been told that the CMDB should track everything in your IT infrastructure. Also, you've probably heard many vendor software discovery tools that go out and discover and register every CI on your infrastructure, and you've probably been told that that's good. But ask yourself this: is this a wise use of resources? If you just have a handful of vital business functions, do you really want to have that much data that amounts to noise and waste? Look, having good CI data is great for your organization, but having too much data and data without focus is definitely not good. So what you can do is identify and classify those CIs that 100% support the vital business functions and acknowledge the rest through secondary services as either risks or something that should be managed through an operational level agreement, an OLA, or even an underpinning contract if it's managed by a third party. If it's not in scope, don't track it. Let me ask you a question. Do you or anyone you know actually enjoy writing SLA, service level agreements? I'm pretty sure that probably the answer is somewhere between no and heck no. I'm sure that this is because of the way many organizations have tried to establish agreements and targets with the business for anything and everything that IT manages. And you've probably seen this a lot. You've probably seen this multi-page SLAs that have like probably 30, 35 pages that is written once and put in shelf and never to be read again. If you have a bunch of well-defined services aligned to clear vital business functions, you could probably write shorter and more impactful SLAs that will actually be great to manage and actually will mean something to people reading them. Maybe you could get away in putting them in a single sheet. The possibilities are endless. Next come risks. Again, having a well-defined scope of services sharpen your focus as it relates to identifying risk. And I chose this picture of the mouse with the helmet because it spoke to me about risk and scope. This little guy here, he wants to get the cheese. He has a very single, narrow-minded scope of getting the cheese. He's ready to get it. He knows the risk of the mousetrap, and he has put his little helmet on his head so he can go in and get it. So this is what he knows. There are many unknowns, but the mousetrap could be electrified, but we don't know that. But he's ready to the degree that he understands it, and that's how having a narrow scope of services helps you identify risk. With a well-defined service scope, you can truly identify and manage the majority of the risks that your service may face. Granted, you can manage the unknowns or the events that you can control, like the weather, but when considering risk, having a good discussion that supports the scope is better than worrying about every possibility or not at all. So you might be wondering then how you might want to start looking at critically at defining and narrowing the scope of service. Well, I found that the 9 principles of ITIL Practitioner can help here. The 9 guiding principles of ITIL Practitioner may provide some guidance and ideas that you can use to start on an improvement path that can lead you to the desired outcome, which is a well-defined service scope. So there are 9 principles, and I chose just a handful here that are applicable to this webinar. And there are more, and you can probably apply to your daily work. So, for example, value. Everything that you do should map directly or indirectly to value as perceived by the customer. If you're delivering a service, product, or report that no one consumes, why bother doing it? If you turn it off, will someone notice? Think about that. Simplicity. I like this principle because it makes you think about services in very different ways. When you look at the activities of your business, not IT, delivers, how many things can you count? Have you looked at your business website from the other side, from the customer side? I'm sure that you can start elevating the service product abstraction layer in such a way that you truly understand how it goes to market in very simple terms. Observe directly and design for user experience. If you're a CIO, IT director or manager, how many times have you actually gone out and see how people out in the business use your services? Have you witnessed how happy or frustrated they are with what you're providing them? There's no need to be an undercover boss for this. Just go there and see. Ask them. Do the Gemba walk. And then include their experience in design and transition activities. This is very important. If you design without them, you're not taking their input into account, and you're really missing a very, very good learning opportunity. Progress iteratively and start where you are. If what you're doing is not working, there is no need to stop everything and start from scratch. Start by checking your company's vision, where you are, where you want to be, and start doing small improvements where possible. These principles will set you on a path to establish a continuous service mentality that will not only fix potential issues with your organization, service scope, but may also spin out even more improvement opportunities that can be very beneficial to your organization. Next up is establish a CSI mentality. Having a continual service improvement mentality at every level of your organization, in combination with the 9 guiding principles discussed previously, will also enable your company to identify and register improvements that work towards the definition and improvement of your organization's IT service scope. Following the CSI approach will enable you to tie improvements from the organization's vision all the way down to the way individual works on improvement initiatives. Once established as a mentality, this feedback loop will enable the organization to look critically at the way services are scoped and can provide the perspectives and tools required to iteratively focus and narrow the scope to one that defines and reflects on what the IT organization does to enable great business outcomes. The CSI approach also enables the organization to broaden the perspectives as to which improvement tools and approaches to use. CSI will also help in sharpening your service scope. It will also help uncover many other potential issues in your organization. Go ahead and give it a chance. Think about how I can use CSI, continuous service improvement, and this mentality to grow, learn, and improve. The worst thing that can happen is that you don't uncover anything, and that can be a very serious problem. So in summary, and to summarize, we talked about service scope and how having a well-defined, narrow definition can help your organization better manage and support business support services. We spoke about ISO. You don't really need to be ISO certified, but you can leverage some of the elements of ISO to define and narrow service scope. Just take a good look, critical look at how your services support outcomes via the understanding of vital business functions, the value stream, and everything that supports these. Everything that you build within that service scope has to work in its support. And we also talked about using the 9 ITIL practitioner principles. We use a little, not all 9, but we used a handful of them along a CSI approach to enable these changes and instill a culture of improvement in your organization. If you decide to do this, your organization will embark on an improvement journey that will change it for the better. Your organization should become better and more focused at supporting your business requirements, and your resources will be better equipped and more nimble to respond to the ever-changing business requirements and their outcomes. And now for questions.
Yes, thank you for the great presentation, Joel. We did get a question during the presentation. I just want to remind everybody that the forum is still open, so you can go feel free to ask a question right now, or if a previous question inspires just one from you. We'll go ahead and start with the first one that I got during this session, which is, what if I don't have a service catalog? Where should I start?
Oh, excellent question. And I kind of riffed on that on a couple of slides before. What you can do is go to the outside, go to your company's website, and look at how they present themselves to the customer. And going back to the bank example, if you go to a banking website, you probably have 5 or 6 services that the bank offers: commercial, personal, personal accounts, commercial, mortgages, loans, credit cards. I don't know. I don't work for a bank, but there's probably a handful of services. Now, if you were to put those in a whiteboard and then start drawing services down, you can probably have the beginning. Number one, you're going to have the beginnings of a service catalog, and number two, you're going to have a good understanding of how those services help deliver value to the bank. It's probably a good thing also to include marketing people, any of the actual clients and the actual users of the services, and bring them to a room. Show them the diagram, say, just a very simple diagram, say, does this look right to you? You don't have to inundate them with technical questions or technical issues. Just lay it out and display it. And ask yourself, does this look right to you? And then start drawing everything that goes down. If it falls outside of those services, you can probably say this is not in scope. You can probably say not safely. You need to do your homework and analysis, because there may be things that, yes, even though it's not in scope of those services, you need, like, say, email. For some reason, you need to route email from one end to the from one end of the organization to the other, and that may be vital. But if it's not in scope, like an HR service, it probably falls outside of those services, and you don't need them. You don't need to actually track them. So that's a way of doing it.
Okay, and we did get another question, which is, we are struggling with a CMDB project. How would limiting the scope of our services help?
Also a very excellent question. And going back to both the CMDB and the Apollo program, when NASA sent out the capsule to the moon, they sent it out with everything that was in the capsule. They didn't send it with anything outside of it. So the astronauts only had the things in the capsule to work with. So think about the CMDB as that capsule. If you have a service called a personal banking service, and you you go out and you do your research and your homework. Say all that we need to deliver a personal banking service are these CIs. That can be your CMDB. If you decide that that is your vital business function, you can then identify those CIs, put them in this capsule, quote unquote, and call it, this is our CMDB. Anything that's outside of that CMDB, we're going to track it differently. We're going to treat it maybe differently, at a different priority or a different scope, different procedures, different functions. But those core CIs in this CMDB that we're calling the personal banking service, those are sacred, and this is what is going to be in there. So if you ever start a project, a CMDB project, and you capture all of the CIs in the organization, desktops, switches, and you end up with a whole lot of noise and data, that's probably a good way to start narrowing and cutting the fat, identifying how your vital business functions support the business and how those CIs fit into that picture, and then start building your CMDB from there.
Okay. All right, that will do it for today with the questions. So thank you for the great answers, Joel. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. I just want to remind everybody that next week is the third session of our webinar series, and this time it's going to be managing your ITSM project to success. If you are tuning in just today for the first time, you will be receiving a follow-up thank you email, which will have the recording to this session, but I'll also include the recording to the first session that we had last week. So if anybody had not attended that, they can go ahead and catch up. And in that same thank you email, we'll include the link to register for next week's session, which is at the exact same time next Wednesday. And here are the methods to contact us. If you have any questions whatsoever over planning your own ITSM transformation, or like to talk to Joel directly, he would be glad to talk to you. Go ahead and ask for him. That's actually his personal information right there. If you'd like to get in personal contact with him, I know he'd love to chat about your current situation, and you can go ahead and pick his mind on this subject as well. Just want to thank everybody again for joining, wherever you are around the world. Thank you again for joining us today. Have a nice one.